Hello and welcome back. In this video I'm going to be showing you 3 different DIY gift ideas. So this first DIY is very simple. You're just going to want to take a jar, this could be any shaped jar, and I'm just simply going to fill it with some dried flowers. And then you just put the lid back on the jar. Of course you could just leave it like this if you want to, but to make it a little bit more decorative, I decided to cover mine with some scrap fabric. Then I just cut a piece of string and tying it into a loose loop, I tried to wrap it around the jar so I could tighten the scrap piece of fabric. But as you see, I did struggle a little bit with this, and I think it's just because I cut the string a bit too short, so you will see that I did cut the string a bit longer and that seemed to help. Also, just ignore the nail varnish. I ruined it and I had to take it off. Then just make sure that you tie the string tightly so it doesn't come undone, and that's it. Your jar is complete. If you want the jar to be a little bit more personalised, then you could embroider the fabric that you wrap over the jar. And some other options are that you could fill the jar with baby oil, and I think that just gives it a little bit more of a magical look to it. If you do that though, make sure you have a secure lid. Or you could fill the jar with tea leaves, and that would also be nice. For our next DIY gift idea, you're going to want to take a scrap piece of fabric and just sketch whatever design you like onto the fabric. As you see, I drew a leaf. Then, placing your fabric in your embroidery hoop, you're going to want to start by stitching around the outline of your drawing. If you're not familiar with embroidery, I can leave a tutorial down below. But I just used a simple back stitch, which, if you don't know what that is just you bring the needle up from underneath the fabric and then stitch a little bit further behind, a little bit behind it, and then bring your needle up again, just a few millimeters in front of that first stitch, and then bring it back again. If that makes sense. Then, taking a full 6-stranded thread, you're going to want to fill in the drawing. Mine was quite simple, I just used green, and it's probably not the neatest stitching, but I did try to make it as neat as I could, and especially I tried to make it symmetrical on both sides. Then, taking that brown thread that I'd used to outline the drawing earlier, I just added a few little details here and there to the leaf until I was happy with it. Then, once you've finished the embroidery, you're going to want to take it out of the hoop and cut around it, but making sure not to cut too close to the actual pin, but leaving quite a bit of fabric, some fabric around it. And then you're going to want to cut some little notches going all the way around, and this will just help to fold the fabric, fold it back behind the pin. And this is where it starts to get a little bit messy. You're going to want to take some super glue and apply that to the back of the pin, and then just folding the fabric back, sticking it there. But I recommend that you do just a few flaps at a time, that way it's a bit easier, and also make sure you pull them pull them quite tight when you're going to glue them to the back. I actually didn't pull it that tight, and you'll see later how I had to fix it. But another thing is that the fabric I used was a bit too thick, I think, so keep in mind to use a thinner, more cotton fabric. I think this process would have been a lot easier had I done that. But as you see, I struggled a bit trying to stick it to the back, and it got very messy and very gluey, but I managed to do it in the end. And then to make the back of the pin look a little bit neater, I just cut a small piece of fabric smaller than the actual pin and just glued that on the back, and that also helps just to keep everything a little bit more secure. Then you turn your pin around to see how it looks, and as you see, I had a bit too much fabric showing, so at first I tried to fix it using small nail scissors, but I just ended up actually pulling up the flaps again before they'd fully dried, and then just re-gluing them, this time pulling a lot tighter. And then I just played around with it a little bit, until I was happy with the way it looked. Oh, and I also tried to cut around the tail of the pin as well as I could. I didn't keep that in mind whilst I was embroidering it, but I accidentally cut it and just ended up gluing it to the back of the pin. And then all that's left to do is to glue the safety pin to the back. I recommend using one of those safety pins that are flat on one side, and then just leave it to dry. I would also like to mention that if you end up making a pin that still has quite a bit of fabric showing, as you see the green round pin that I made, then I recommend that you put a little bit of cardboard inside, in the back of it, and then glue the flaps down, and this will just help stop some of that glue from seeping through the fabric. And for the last DIY gift idea, you're going to want to take a plastic pot, and also you're going to want to have enough soil so you can fill that pot. As you see, I just placed it in another container, and this was so that I could leave it in the window for a couple of days to dry out. Then, because the pot I used didn't have any drainage holes, I took a nail and tried to knock some little holes in myself, but as you see, I just ended up cracking the entire bottom of the pot, but I just left it, it still works. Up next, you're going to need some paint and a little container to put your paint in. You could just go ahead and paint the pot, but I wanted mine to have a bit more of a ceramic effect. So to do that, I added some bicarbonate of soda to the paint, and I just added it little bits at a time until I got the consistency that I wanted. And then I just applied it to the pot. As you see, it was a little bit thick to begin with, so I just added a little bit of water, and that helped thin it out a little bit and make it easier to paint with. And then once you've applied a nice even coat, you're going to want to leave that to dry and then apply a second coat. And then when that's dried, you're going to want to go over it a third time. But for the third layer, I didn't add the bicarbonate of soda, I just painted straight over it. And then of course you could leave it there, but I didn't like the colour that it had turned out, so I added a fourth layer, but this time using a much lighter green. And this last step is optional, But to make the pot a little more interesting, I painted some toadstools going all the way around. Of course, you can decorate your pot however you like. As for the soil, I left it to dry out, as you see, until it was nice and soft and fun to play with. Next, I took this bubble wrap bag that I had and I cut it down to the size that I wanted it, making sure it was still big enough to fit the soil in it. And then I just sellotaped down the side of the bag, and putting the soil into it, I folded the top and then sellotaped that down, making sure it was all completely secure. Then, to make it look prettier, I took a piece of brown paper and wrapped it as you would a present. And I tried to seal it using washi tape, but as you see, that didn't work very well, so I had to use sellotape. And then I decorated the front of it with a little bit of washi tape, and I wrote soil on a little piece of paper and glued that onto the washi tape. And then I just tied a little string around it, which I think made it look like a little Victorian package. For the packet of seeds, I just used a ruler to draw out the design of the packet onto a brown piece of paper. If you like, you can pause the video and copy out my measurements. Similar to the bag of soil, I made a little bag of bubble wrap and made sure that it was small enough to fit inside the brown paper packet. And then, taking a box of blue flower seeds that I had, I poured the seeds onto a thin strip of paper, and that made it easier to pour into the bag. And then finally I made a cute little tag to go with the present, with the contents of the gift on one side and a little to and from on the other. And that's all for this video. If you found it useful, give it a little like and comment down below which gift you liked the best. And I'll see you next time. Bye!